Welcome to a new episode on Stories Lost. Before we begin, a special shout out to all aircraft crew members that suspect that they could have witnessed something inexplicable up in the big blue. This episode has you in its heart. We hope you like it. Would you trust what your eyes tell you? If you saw something that couldn't rationally be explained, do you think an unexplained event would stay with you? And if so, for how long? Would it stay as a visceral memory long enough for you to be willing to make a police report years later, risking the scorn of skeptics and unbelievers? Or would you suppress it to the back of your conscience in order to live a life within the ease of conformity, no questions asked? Or would you be the one brave enough to stick your neck out? Either way, it makes you admire those who have had the tenacity to hold fast to their observations and stubbornly insist that what they saw was beyond the ordinary, beyond what they ever in their life had experienced before. Even when the experts of aviation and space try their best to disprove what you in your heart hold for facts. On January 28, 1994, the crew of an Air France Airbus A320 was flying from Nice to London. They had been airborne for 56 minutes when they, at 1:14 p.m., observed a mysterious phenomenon in the air, a phenomenon that kept them company for almost a minute. The aircraft was flying over the Coulommiers region in Seine-et-Marne under perfect weather conditions. The chief steward, who was in the cockpit at the time, reported to the captain that a phenomenon on the left side of the aircraft had appeared, 25 nautical miles off to the side. The steward told the other crew members that he thought the object resembled a weather balloon. However, the captain and the co-pilot, on the other hand, quickly ruled that alternative out. But why? Why dismiss the steward's first impression so emphatically? There are important reasons for this, all of which we must take into consideration if we would like to gauge in any shape or form the credibility of this sighting. The first reason as to why there is considerable weight to an alternate explanation of events, and that this was in fact something else than a weather balloon blown off course, is the fact that the pilot and co-pilot in tandem reported these incidents, first as due procedure, and again 3 years later. Why this big-time gap, you might ask? They jointly felt compelled to approach authorities in 1997, after Paris Match, a reputable French newspaper agent, published the incident report that they, at the time for the incident, had submitted to the Air Defense Operations Center 3 years prior. Now in 1997, they felt compelled to get in contact with the French Gendarmerie and the SEPRA, short for the Service for the Study of Rare Aerospace Phenomena. SEPRA took the report in consideration and then conferred the case to GEIPAN, the French unit responsible for researching and investigating unidentified aerospace phenomena. So who are the GEIPAN? Half-jokingly, there are those that refer to them as the French version of the Men in Black, and some refer to their now retired front figure, Jean-Jacques Velasco, as a French Fox Mulder, the fictional character from X-Files. They consist of a small group full-time employed experts in aeronautics, space, and weather that examine reports using scientific methods. The members do not like the epithet UFO hunters, but even though they rely on scientific analysis and rigor, they haven't ruled anything out. By collecting witness testimonies, analyzing physical evidence, and applying expertise from various disciplines, the organization strives to provide an objective assessment of each report. Their database, accessible to the public, contains thousands of case studies and reports spanning several decades. The database classifies their acts from A to D, categorizing sightings based on the level of identification achieved through their rigorous investigative process. Class A denotes phenomena that have been definitively identified as known objects or events, while Class B indicates cases where identification is inconclusive due to insufficient data. Class C encompasses phenomena that defy current explanations, but due to lack of evidence or investigation, remain unresolved. Class D cases are characterized by high weirdness, meaning that no hypothesis adequately explains the observed phenomena, despite thorough investigation. Today's episode reports back from a Class D1 phenomenon, a case that defies both common sense and scientific investigation. But like always on Stories Lost, we'll let you be the judge. You'll find a link to the case file in the description. In the case before us, GEIPAN was alerted and conducted a thorough investigation. The pilot and co-pilot consistently told the same story to investigators numerous times over the phone and in person. If hindsight was a factor, or the bias of a posteriori constructions, imagination, or any other form of delusion, it was nonetheless apparent to investigators that their account was categorical and held its ground over time. And it continued to prove a puzzling case, even for the specialist team of aviation and weather experts, as they tried to search for reasonable explanations, not withholding something unknown. During the course of their investigations, attempts to locate the third member of the flight crew, the steward who was the first to see the strange object in the sky, was repeatedly attempted. Unfortunately, the flight logs of crew members at Air France were not stored beyond a 36-month cycle, and therefore his identity remains to this day a mystery. The second reason why this case really raised alarm bells was the external confirmation of an unidentified flying object. When the crew of the Airbus A320 caught sight of the unidentified object, the captain had hailed the RAM's air traffic control and reported what he had seen. They, in turn, informed him that there was no air traffic in the area. At the same time, an unidentified radar track was recorded. This trace, recorded for 50 seconds, did cross the trajectory of flight AF3532 and did not correspond to any filed flight plan. It is also noteworthy that the signal disappeared simultaneously from the view of radar screens as it did from the view of the crew. Coup de théâtre. For the first time in the history of France, a UFO had left a radar trace. Investigators of GEIPAN remained cautious about the correlation between the radar signature and the phenomenon. Even if the cautious experts deemed that the radar signature did not match the observation fully, the phenomenon was clearly not an aircraft, since there would have been a matching radar trace. The radar trace corroborated the flight crew's observation of a flying object. But this evidence was not the heaviest indication of something unearthly. The prime reason why the phenomenon might have haunted the flight crew for a substantial amount of time was the sheer estimated size of the flying object. According to the testimony of witnesses, the object was gigantic. It was of an enormous size, declared the captain 3 years later, as they made the formal report to GEIPAN. I really saw a bizarre thing that day, emphasized the co-captain. In a missive to investigators, the pilot Jean-Charles Duboc retold how the events unfolded. I was the captain of the Airbus A320 on Air France Flight 3532, operating the Nice-London route on January 28, 1994. You understand from reading the lines in my logbook that it is difficult to testify to such a mysterious and inexplicable phenomenon, and why I initially refused to write a report on this encounter. We were cruising near Coulommiers at flight level 390, 11,700 meters, in excellent meteorological conditions, with visibility of 100 to 150 nautical miles, 200 to 300 kilometers. A steward in the cockpit was the first to see this object and exclaimed, "A weather balloon." The young co-pilot also initially identified it as a weather balloon. I was the third and last to see it, initially mistaking it for an aircraft banking at a 45-degree angle before leveling its wings. The excellent visibility and presence of altocumulus clouds then allowed me to estimate that this object was about 25 nautical miles away, at flight level 350, 10,500 meters, at our 10 o'clock position. We passed it, and I could observe its brownish shape, with slightly blurred edges, and an immense size, which I estimate to be about 1,000 meters in length and 100 meters thick. An aircraft is just a dot at 25 nautical miles. This object appeared to be a gigantic disk, which we saw from several angles. As we passed it with the aircraft, I saw it become transparent and disappear without moving. We immediately contacted the RAM's control center to see if they had any information on what we had seen. The rest of the story is in the article from Paris Match, which informed me that this object had left a radar signature. Both pilot and co-pilot continued to describe the flying object in terms of a dark brown or red disk that changed shape before suddenly disappearing. In their investigation, GEIPAN worked on several hypothesizes. The one they thought most likely to be fruitful was the weather balloon theory. In 2012, a new verification was requested from Météo France in order to study the possibility of there having been a sounding balloon that could have intersected the Airbus A320. Indeed, investigators could verify that a sounding balloon had crossed the aircraft's trajectory. But according to the logs, this must have happened 1 hour before the observation took place. The starting point is the trap station. The balloon gained altitude at an average ascent rate of 4.9 meters per second in a northwest flow. At 1:14 p.m., the time of observation by the crew of the Airbus, which was 56 minutes into the flight, the balloon was located at an altitude of 17,404 meters, 107,528 meters to the east, and 87,540 meters to the south of Traps, which is close to the vertical line of Joigny. The balloon then continued to rise to 31,411 meters, where it burst. A balloon that bursts at an altitude of over 30 kilometers can reach a significant diameter, but it can hardly exceed a few meters or feet. It cannot in any case reach a diameter of several hundred meters or feet, as indicated by the witnesses. Mystified by the fact that the sounding balloon theory didn't hold up, investigators were left with two much weaker working hypotheses. These two possibilities could still be considered, but were on the other hand impossible to consolidate. First, there could have been an unknown atmospheric optical phenomenon, or there could have been a flexible object, for example a balloon envelope, flying with the wind. What about the co-pilot? In correspondence with Jean-Jacques Velasco, the co-pilot writes as follows: "Dear Sir, I was quite surprised to be contacted about this unusual sighting we experienced during our flight on January 28, 1994, now 3 years later. I am the pilot officer who flew the flight in question with Captain Duboc, and he is the one who has kept me informed about this matter. He asked me to respond to your inquiry regarding our cruising speed at the time of our observation, because he is currently abroad and will be absent for several days. Our speed was low that day due to a very strong headwind, around 120 knots. In cruise, we generally have true airspeeds of around 450 knots, which gives a ground speed of about 330 knots on the day in question, perfectly consistent with what the radar recorded. He also informed me of your interest in my testimony, so, although my memories are a bit fuzzy, I will report what I saw. It was the steward who was in the cockpit at the time, and the one who drew our attention and alerted us to what he was seeing. At first, we thought it was a weather balloon located to the left of the aircraft at about the same altitude as us. We quickly realized our mistake, and were surprised to find that what we were seeing did not resemble anything we knew. We were all very intrigued. The mental image that has stayed with me of this phenomenon is of something dark and large. At the time, I thought it was an object capable of geometrical variation, because we saw it change shape. But it must have been a disk that we saw from different angles, as the captain believes. The visual perception of a disk moving in space, I mean in 3 dimensions, perfectly matches the idea I have of it. Then this thing disintegrated, or rather, I should say that it became invisible. You know the rest. We reported to the control agency we were in contact with that we had just seen something very strange, and asked if there had been a radar echo. They responded in the negative. As for me, I thought we were probably the only ones to have observed the phenomenon, and that the subject matter in all essentials was closed. I regret not being able to give you more details. This is all I remember. I hope these few pieces of information will be useful to you, and I remain at your disposal for any further information you may require." The co-pilot's testimony wraps up this week's episode. All things said, no matter if you believe it was a weather balloon or something else. Perhaps you go as far as to think it was something science still is not able to explain. No matter the conclusion you are presently at, we must remember that the men and women piloting the skies have from time to time been brave enough to come forward, countering the veritable stigma that inevitably seems to follow. From all parts of the world, aircraft staff have testified that the skies might not be as empty as we like to think. Today's case might be just one single story, but in unison, they should make all of us think twice about voicing any skepticism too decidedly. A special thank you to the featured pilots coming forward in 1997 and the organization GEIPAN, opening its case files to the public. This week, I would especially like to thank Jacob Murbach, Barbara W. and a Strummin Dude, who all bought coffee at buymeacoffee.com. If you also want to support the channel's continued work, see the link to Buy Me a Coffee in the section description. See you next week.